All right, so I'm going to talk about filtering today. And by filtering, what am I talking about? Because filtering has many meanings in our product. Ifs and where conditions. So we're filtering your database, we're filtering your tables to only get the information that you want. So we're going to do that using an if or a where. I'm going to talk about different data type rules. We're going to talk a little bit about filter file, which is a way to apply a filter without having a where condition. We're going to talk about filters in synonym. And then if you have a filter in your synonym, how to make it mandatory, which means it's always going to be active and you don't have to, again, specify it. Lastly, we're going to talk about by rows over across columns, which lets you do sorting your way if you've been to some of our other sessions. Because when you use these techniques, it's an implied filter. It's an implied where condition. So let's start with an if. So the if is the very basic filtering, where condition, record selection. You can only do if a field, and then you have your operator, if a field is equal to, not equal to, greater than, less than, a value. So I can't go field to field. I can only go field to a value. Can I go field to an expression? No, I can't do that either. It's only field to value. I think I specified that enough. Multiple if statements will be ANDed together. So if I have if country equals England, if car equals Jaguar, then it would be as if you wrote country equals England and car equals Jaguar. So in this example, table file car, sum dealer cost, retail cost by country by car. The rest of it is basically just styling. Our output looks like so. So there's no where, there's no if, we get all the records back. If I only want country equals France or Italy, now somebody's out there saying, but you just said it's only to a value. Well, you can do a string of values that are ORed together. So if country equals France or Italy is fine. So it's the same field, and this we're looking at different values on the other side. But again, they're still values. And we get only the France and Italy as we expected. Same query, table file car. I want if country equals Italy or car like J%. So I have country equals Italy with all cars that start with the letter J. Now, because of the or, I don't care what country the car that starts with the letter J is in. So I'm doing this as an if. I add my additional styling, and I get an error. A word is not recognized, like. Because remember, your if expression can only be if field equals value. Here I have if field equals value or field like value. So that's not going to work. Can't do it. Stop. So how do we get around that? Well, that's where we go into the where, because the where is a lot more flexible in what you do in the syntax. Here you can have a where expression, any valid expression. It can be a simple where a field equals value, where a field equals another field, where expression 1 or end expression 2. You can do where expression 3 or expression 4. And you can tell I've done this presentation too many times because I knew exactly what my field's names or my expression names were. If you have multiple where conditions, they, like the ifs, will be ANDed together. Okay, back to our query. So now I can say where country equals Italy or car like J%. And now I get the output I'm looking for. Would it be possible to show some of this some of these same examples in InfoAssist? Had I planned up front? Yes, but not right now. Let's keep this in the back burner, and if we have time, maybe I'll dare to try to bring up my info assist. But again, we'll have to go live, and you never know what's going to happen. I should have added in the future. Okay, I'll keep that in mind, Brad. Thanks. All right, data type rule. So these are for your expressions. So general rules, values used with alpha and date fields need to be surrounded by single apostrophes, or we call them tick marks. Values used with date time fields should use the DT function. And that will translate the readable date time into internal storage. Let's see. Values used with numeric fields, no apostrophes or editing is required. And then for if only, because you can only do if field operator value, the value does not have to be in apostrophes if it's alpha. The only exception to that would be is if you're looking for a value that has an embedded space in it. Okay. All right, any questions on if or where? Okay, nothing that I see. Okay, so there's a comment. I think Infosys only generates where statements. That is correct. That's one of the reasons why where was added to allow the writing of complex filtering. Absolutely. There's a question in Q&A. Would that or example be valid using the or? I thought you just said it could only and things together. So I know that within App Studio, it doesn't allow for or. Ran into that yesterday. No, App Studio, through the where assist, you should be able to do an or. And I think there's a little drop down where you select whether you're oring or anding to the previous expression. And that's in App Studio, which is even a third product now that we're talking about. Why use an if over a where statement if the latter is more versatile? So it's more versatile, but the if you have a where statement that says where field equals value, the web focus engine will convert it into an if, because it's a simple if field equals value. So if you do a where, but it could have been an if, then it saves that translation if you do the if yourself. Now, what kind of savings are we saying? Minimal. So at this point in this day, with the powerful processors that we're all running on, it probably won't matter. But that's the reason. If you're using an if, it's going to be just a tad quicker. Well, all these questions popping in. Eric, I'm not sure what your question is. Would that or example be valid using the or? So if you're using a where, I can do ands and ors all combined. If I'm doing an if, I can only do if field equals value. If I have multiple ifs, then they're anded. So the only place you could really do an or would be in the where condition, and that should be valid. Correct? But if you had an if with an or example. Okay, so I had an if with an or example to show that that doesn't work and that you get an error. So let me just go back. Let me just see here. So here's the example. If country equals Italy or car like, we get an error. A word is not recognized, like, and then the don't do this. All right. So if statements are better, but probably pretty negligible. Correct. You might mention that read limits and record limit are only applicable to if. No, that's not true. So read limit, the way read limit was implemented was we will read the number of, so we have an expression, read limit equals a number. So if I say if read limit equals 10, the implementation was we will read 10 records. Now, if your where conditions or your filtering conditions, whether they're met or not, we will stop processing your query after we read 10 records. Where a record limit says stop processing after you met the number of records that meet the conditions. So if I have a record limit equals 10, and I say where country equals England, or let's say country equals England, and I do a record limit of 2. So instead of seeing the 4 records for England, it will stop after it matches 2 records. So that's what read limit and record limit, and they should work for both. No. So Mike, you can do where record limit equals 5. All right, please provide additional specifics. All right, Eric, I'm gonna ask you to put something in the comments when you do the evaluation, and we'll follow up with you. If we'll work with or. Okay. If statements can be converted to where. I would have assumed that if the if statements would be converted to where in the SQL. So anytime you go to SQL and we translate to SQL, SQL doesn't have an if. So even if you have an if, it's going to get converted to a where. But that's in the SQL translator. When you're doing, when focus is, so you guys are getting tough today. So when you run a query, especially if it's going against a relational data source, web focus has to make a determination. Can I pass this to the relational query engine, which can do it more efficiently, or do I have to do the work myself? So anything time we can push the work over to the relational database, it's going to be a little more efficient because it knows how to get the data better than we do. So we have to then translate your focus query into the SQL language, which is kind of what I'm going to go over next month's session. So this is a nice little segue. So we have to follow the rules that are over there, and SQL does not have an if statement. So yes, we will translate even your if statements going to relational into a where condition. And it's one where condition, and it will be compounded with all your ands and ors wherever they're needed. Okay, cool. If uses are correct. If uses or when comparing 2 values for the same field, right? And I showed that in the previous slide. But I said if it's better performance. All right, so Reed, you're getting stuck on the differences between SQL and focus. If it's focus managed, if focus is doing all the work, then the where statement, if it can be converted to an if, will be converted to an if. So, all right, let's move on. All right, we did these. Filter file. So for filter file, it's an external where condition, let's say. So I have filter file name. And then if I want to clear any previous ones or add 2 previous ones, this is just like a define file. We give it our expression, and you use the same expression definitions as you would in any where condition. Give the filter a name, so name equals filter name, and then your where condition. So the define expressions are if I need to calculate a field that I'm going to use in my where expression. So if I want to say if profit is greater than 10,000, in the define area, I can say profit equals retail cost minus dealer cost. And then I can use that in the where expression and say where profit greater than 10,000. Like all the other things in our product, we're going to end with an end. And then you turn the filter on by doing set filter equals filter name in the file that you're putting it on in. Kind of sounds a little funny. And then say the word on. If you're turning it off, you would say in file name off. If you want to see what filters are active, you can do a question mark space filter command. So here we have filter file car, name equals England filter, where country equals England, end. And then in my query, I'm going to say table file car, just like I did before. Sum dealer cost, retail cost by country by car. Our output is everything. So why are we getting everything? So I defined the filter, but I didn't actually activate it. So to activate it, we have to do the set filter on. So we have our filter code. Then we set filter equals England filter, the name, in car on. Same query. Now we only see England. Plus we see if you do a view source, if you're running to output HTML, number of records in table, and it says access limited by filters. So we put that message because there is no where condition here, but you are being filtered. So this is to let you know that probably something is happening outside of what you asked for. Here we have England filter, and now we have one called seats 2. So I can turn both of them on. And now my output only shows the 2-seaters. Question mark filter shows me that I have 2 filters that are currently active. Okay, filters in your synonyms, in your masters. Filter name equals expression. Simple enough. You can give it a title, you can give it a description, and you can make it mandatory or not. So the default is not mandatory. So in my carvug master, I added a filter, country underscore Japan equals country equals Japan. Notice I end with a semicolon and then comma $sign. To use it, I say where and just mention the name. So now when I run the query, I get just Japan. So notice if I run and I have my filter Japan in the master, and I say table file carvug, sum d cost r cost, I got everything output. Because just like a filter file, I didn't turn it on. So unless I have a where country underscore JPN, it's not going to be activated unless I make it mandatory. So now if I add the mandatory keyword, mandatory equals yes, run the same query that doesn't have any where conditions, now I only see Japan because the filter, the where condition was now invoked because it was mandatory. So Charles, what about where in file? In what regards? Let me come back to you. Let me finish this and we'll come back so you can clarify. Because I'm not sure where in file would be only where in file can be done in a where and it can be done as an if, but it's a little different syntax. So let me get back to you when I get through here. So here I'm using rows over. So I'm doing sum dealer cost, retail cost by country, rows England over West Germany. So now, because I'm using rows over, only the values I see that you explicitly mention in the rows over will show up in the output. So this is an implied where condition. Okay, and that's all that I have here. So, yeah, no. All right, so where country equals where country in file name. So if you have a list of values that you want to look for, you can put them in a file. So this is a little more specific than what I was planning to go into. I was just going to do, where field expression. I didn't like go into betweens and anything like that, or where in. So, but if you have a list of values and you want to look for the existence of a value in a field to that list, you can do an expression called where in file. So if you have a file that says my countries and it has 2 rows in it, one England, one France, and I can then say where country in file, my file. So it's a good point, but I didn't really want to get into that specifics right now. But thank you. Any other questions? To clarify rows, to clarify file equals table. So to clarify file equals table, what does that mean? Where file so in all of our syntax, we have table file name, define file name, filter file name. The word file has to be there, but it's there to identify the table. So if you do table file car is the file that you're reporting against. It could be a focus database. It could be a DB2 table. Sergio, I'm a little confused because it depends on where file is being used. If you say table file name, you have to have the word file physically there. When performing a filter file, can you include multiple where conditions? And if so, if any upper limit on how many conditions? So yes, you can have multiple where conditions. Again, if you have multiple wheres, they're going to be ANDed together. Is there a limit on how many conditions you can have? In the newer releases, there should not be any limit. There used to be a limit of 32K, but those have been removed quite a while ago. So as long as you're in the 9 version leveling or even the 8, you shouldn't have to worry about any of those limits. All right, anything else? Let's see how we're doing. Good on time. All right, I found that SQL will break down if there are too many values in the where in file. Okay, so when you do an in file, you're basically writing, especially in the SQL, if you have like 1,000 values, you're going to translate into the SQL that we pass to Oracle, DB2, SQL Server, whatever. And there used to be a limit of only 32K. So it was very easy if your field was wide enough to fill up that buffer of 32K. Nowadays, we shouldn't really have those limits anymore. Again, this is another one of those areas where we tried to eliminate the limit. I limit it to like 20K values and then do looping if I have more. And another thing you could do is if you are trying to do an in file and you have a lot of values, if the values you're looking up are coming from another SQL table, don't put them in a hold file. You can create a thing called an SQL script, which will generate the select statement to get those values from the other table. So when you do your translated SQL and do the where in file, you're not passing values, you're just passing the script to get the values. Not a focus limit. That's correct, because it's not really a focus limit. I think Oracle only had a couple thousand as their limit. So it would be more efficient to do an inner join. Now we're getting into joins. I'm not going to go there today. Yeah, no. So it aware in file, kind of like a inner join, but you have an in SQL. So where car in, open parentheses, tick mark, England, tick mark, comma, Japan, close parentheses. It's kind of like that. If you're doing an in file, then it reads all those values and puts them all in the right syntax. So it's still not quite like a join, but you get join type of results. All right, Renee, take it away. Yes.
All right.
And I'll try to field these questions over here.
Yeah, just, for any questions, I would say let's listen to the presentation and then maybe we can keep things to the end, but certainly you can put them in chat and we can address them at the end. Yeah. You should be able to see my screen now.
Yes.
Yep. Good. All right. Perfect. All right. So thank you everyone for joining today. Really appreciate it. Hopefully you learn a lot. And even if you've been working with designer pages, maybe you'll learn something that you didn't know before this presentation. Make your time worthwhile listening and attending, and reinforce maybe some things you already know. So designer pages and WebFocus, I'm showcasing 9.3, but many of the things are applicable to 9.2 as well. And I'll make a point of things that I know that was specifically added, like for 9.3. So why would you want, right? You create content, you create visualizations in WebFocus, reports, charts, and really you want pages, right? Pages is part of a portal, and you want to be able to, have multiple content, runtime options. So the whole point of today, the introduction, is to showcase how you can create designer pages. We'll navigate, and then we'll create a sample. And we'll build on from there with the next presentation for next month. So the very first thing is how you create a designer page. And there's actually two different kinds of pages. There's assembled pages, which are assembled from existing content, and then authored pages, which you create from new content. And how you get to them is a little bit different. So the first thing is navigation. I'm in the WebFocus Hub. I'm in a 9.3.0 environment. And click the plus, and if I click Assemble Visualizations, that's how I can get into what we call creating page content, assembled content from existing content. These are pages from existing content, meaning you already have your reports and charts created, and you want to pull them into a page, right? A little bit different than an authored page, and I'll show you that in a moment. So if I click Assemble Visualizations, it's going to bring me into where I choose a template. And there's a bunch of different templates here. Blank gives you the most flexibility. But if I pick grid 2x1, what it's saying is I'm going to create a page and I'm going to have two containers on the top and one on the bottom. So it kind of sets up some containers for you. But I like picking blank just because it gives you that flexibility. And you can create your own custom templates. We won't have time for that today, but just to be aware of it. So I'm just going to pick blank just to get into the canvas. So this is what we call an assembled page for existing content. Now, I can also, if I wanted to, create a page in this way, and I can go to containers, and we'll go through this a little bit more detail, but if I pick this Explorer container and drag it over, what it does is it creates and embeds the WebFocus workspaces area in this container. And you'll notice this plus content. You can't look at it in preview, but there is a run button. I'm going to run it just to showcase it, just for navigation purposes. So what I could have is I could have a page as part of a portal that has this Explorer container within it that has workspaces embedded, and then I have the option with the plus content to actually pick create a visualization or assemble visualizations from existing content or even compose document and everything. And I like to showcase that as a potential option. So some customers actually, this is how they allow their users to create new content or access existing content through the portal directly using such a container. So a second. Let me just close that out. I just wanted to kind of showcase that. And I'm going to close this and leave it. Because I want to show you one other thing. So another possibility is an authored page. And I think understanding the distinction between the two is very important because they do have differences in some capabilities. So I'm going to just create a visualization. And this you might be much more familiar with if you created reports and charts in Web Focus Designer. So let me just pick this. So just so I can pick IBI SAMP, and I'll pick car. I could have picked WF Retail. And I'll click and create a visualization. And this will seem very familiar to you, and I'm just going to pick country and retail costs for the horizontal and vertical. And then, so this is just a single piece of content right now. Notice I have a data component because I came in as new authored content, and I'm in the visualization component of this. But again, it's a single content. This is not a page yet. But what we do is we have this option here that says convert to a page. The moment you select that, it does convert it, and you can't undo it. So if you do have something, you want to make sure you save the visualization before you convert it, because once it's converted, it is converted. But here I click plus, and now what you'll see is it took that visualization and created a page, and now that visualization is in a container. And you can see some things on the sidebar have changed and everything. But what you'll notice is this is what we call an authored page. This is from new content. And now I could add additional containers if I want through here or through the container option you'll see. And then I could build out this page. One of the things I just want to showcase, because it's an important distinction as well, is I'm going to put a filter on the page for country. And you'll notice, okay, it did the filter no problem. And there's some things that are different between an author page and an assemble page, and this is one of them, what the filter kind of control looks like, what kind of control you have over it. There's an option here for filters, and you can link all filters, do not link. This has to do with an authored page, use content as filters. But one thing I like to point out too with an authored page that's separate from an assembled page from existing content is really the filter. Here, if I were to select England, that's my default value. If I run this page, what you will see is that it does select England as the default value. This is for an authored page. However, for an assembled page, if you set this value in the preview in the page, it'll apply to the preview, but when you run it, that's not the default value. And there is a different area as it relates to that filter where you can adjust the default value. But I like to make this distinction because if you're doing both, it can be a little bit confusing, and it's just something I think to be aware of. And again, this is some of the nuances and differences. And I think the ultimate goal is we do plan to merge these together to really make it a seamless process for you to create both existing content, pages from existing content, and authoring new content in pages as well. But again, they're separate at the moment, and this is 9.3. This is true for 9.2 as well. But I wanted to showcase that difference, and you'll see it when I do an assembled page. So that's just an overview. And also, I should mention, because we're talking about the tutorials here, I'm going to use CAR today. I know everybody's really familiar with CAR, also WF Retail, but it has a lot of data, and I'm going to showcase that the next time for the next session. But I thought CAR was a really nice, different way to be able to start out as an introduction. But just in case you're not aware of the tutorials, if I go to, that applications directory, there's this plus data option. And if you scroll down to the bottom, there's a tutorials option. And here is where you can get access to our tutorials. And there's a list of them. The legacy ones that include CAR, the application directory will be IBI SAMP for IBI samples. And it doesn't give you any other options because they're focused databases. There's nothing else. And then you can see you have the create button here on the bottom, right-hand corner, that you can create it. I already have it. And for the retail demo, WF Retail demo, right now it says select database. I deliberately have an environment here that says as vanilla as possible, and I did not create any other database connections. So it knows that and says, okay, DATREC, basically this would be suffix equal fixed files, flat files, right? But if I had other database connections set up in the reporting server, it would be smart enough to make those available to me relationally, where I could select, like if it was Oracle or SQL Server, and allow to create that, and then I could change the size that I want, and of course the application directory probably would be something other than IBI SAM, and I could create that and let it run through. I already have retail created here in the retail underscore samples that I created. So I just want to showcase that in case you're not aware of where the tutorials are located. Okay, so let's come back to it. So now we understand that there's two different types of pages. There's authored pages for new content, assembled pages from existing content, and we're going to discuss assembled pages. So the very first thing I want to go is, I'm going to go plus and assemble visualizations. And we talked about navigation, so you have those options as well. And again, talking about the type of template, I'm going to pick blank to get the greatest flexibility on how I want to build out my page. I'm not really going to be doing much today, but I'm going to still select that. But you do have these other options if that's something that you want to leverage and, again, create your own. And we give you a link there to show you how to do it. So I'm going to click blank. And now I'm within an assembled page. Looks very familiar, right? Should seem very similar to the designer visualization, but obviously differences because this is not a visualization, this is a page. Also notice with an authored page, right, we still have the data component because we were authoring new content. Here we only see visualization. This top section right here is the designer toolbar. We have the little hamburger menu right here that I like to call application menu. We can create new content. We can open existing content. We can save the current content that we're in, or save it as. We had something existing and we made some changes and tweaked it. You know how it goes. I can export what I see right now on the page as a PDF landscape, portrait, or image, or I can close it out. Pretty straightforward. I have the save button here as well. One of the things I'll mention now with save as, when I start talking about options with classes and IDs, you'll see everything is an object, everything has an ID. If you do a save as, IDs change, but classes will always remain the same if you put something. This is particularly if you're doing custom JavaScript within your pages. So I'm making note of that now. I'll make note of it later and probably really in our next session, but I just want to mention it here for reference. That's why having classes on objects really helps if you're dealing with JavaScript, because your classes won't change even if you start duplicating files, pages, because you want to tweak or do something different. But IDs, if you do save as, those will change if you do a save as. So I probably said that enough times now to get that point across. Going across again, visualization, you don't see a data component because we're dealing with existing content. And then we have a little option here, which I'll go back to in a moment once I discuss the rest of the page. And then we have a help button. So that's the designer toolbar right there at the top. Now, the sidebar here that you see, it impacts what we call a resource panel or resource pane over here. The very first thing I want to look at is outline. When you come into a page, right, you'll see right away, you'll notice you have a blue focus border. That's what you're focused on. And contextually, things will change based on where your focus is on the page. So right now I'm on the entire page, and I can see that it says Visualization 1 because I haven't saved this and changed the name. But I can change my focus of where I'm going. If I click this is a section. And you can see it has the blue border on here. I certainly could click JavaScript. It'll bring me into JavaScript. I'm not going to do any of that now, but you can see some comments there. Or CSS, Cascading Style Sheet, and I can go in there as well. But I like to point out, this is what you see as a skeleton because I came in as a blank template. Now, just to showcase it, because the outline is really your friend. If you're not sure where you're at in a page and you need to focus or get access to something specific, go to the outline if you ever have a doubt of what you're trying to reach, because it will be there. It is referenceable. And just to show that as a good point, I'm just going to create real quick a separate page. Just bear with me a moment. And instead of picking blank, I'm going to pick grid 2-1. You notice the difference right away. I have a page. I have the two containers and a third container here. I can drop content in. It's telling me that. I can drag it in. But what I want to show you is the outline. You can see the impact. You can see here's the section with the containers. And then I can see the container actually itself and notice the ID. Here's an important thing right here. I'm in the settings, and this is the settings format panel, or I like to call it a properties panel, right? But this is in the settings tab. You can see everything has an ID, and that's the container. If I click within the container, notice how it impacts the outline, and then I can see I'm at the content. And everything has a class that you can associate with it. But of course, here, if I focus on 2, and then in the content, on container 3, and then in the content. So I just wanted to showcase that because I think it's a really important distinction to understand in that outline. As you build a page, you're going to see more there, right? Because you have more content on the page that allows you access. But again, we allow it through the user interface. You can click where you need to. But if ever in doubt, you can always go to the outline. I think that's an important concept to understand. I'm going to close that one out. I'm going to go back to our simple blank template. You can see we just have the section 1, which has a section. Notice when I'm on the page, it has page dash for the ID. And then we just saw JavaScript and CSS. We're still in the sidebar. When you want to change, notice the fields is grayed out here. And that's because we're an assembled page and you can't author new content in an assembled page. So it is grayed out. Filters. We don't have any content on the page, and the content, if we did have it, needs to have some kind of parameters, filters, in order for this to be enabled to see anything here. But it's still where we can look at it, because the idea is that you will have filters or parameters, but there's nothing there at the moment. We can click into content. So you can see how the little blue bar on the side shows you where you are on the sidebar, and then the content of the resource panel changes, the resource pane changes based on where we're located on the sidebar. And so now I'm on the containers. These are the different types of containers. You have a basic container, tab, carousel, and accordion allow you for multiple content within the same container. Grid container is very useful. You'll see that you'll get a filter toolbar that's automatic with a page. But maybe you don't like the positioning, you don't want it positioned on top, or maybe you have a lot of filters and you need to have something in conjunction to that. You can use a grid container to either have an alternate location on your page where your filters will be located, or in conjunction with the default filter toolbar. The panel group, which is very nice, that allows you to have multiple containers, but to keep them together with responsive folding. So just something to be aware of. A link tile container is you have something where you could put like a background on it, a link, an image, and then you can click through and associate content with it that can open in a new browser window or as a page overlay viewer on top of the page. Explorer, we just looked at, right, at the navigation component, right? When I said, let me put an Explorer container out there, and then if I run it, I can actually gain access and create new content or access existing content. Explore data, kind of from the DSML side, where it allows you to analyze. You can associate multiple synonyms and can allow the user to analyze and ask questions based on that. So we're not going to get to those containers today, but the idea is to understand there is a lot of options available to you, and probably for, like, just for today, we're going to be doing basic containers. I'm hoping for the next presentation we can look more at having multiple content in single containers, which can be extremely useful, especially if you have a lot of content to be associated with a page. And then, of course, because we're assembling from from existing content, right, not new content, we have to be able to access our content, and certainly I can navigate through and go through, and I can certainly search as well. And then I'm going to be navigating to small widgets here that I have, and I can search through in there if I had subdirectories to find the content I would need. And then controls. Control is very important. Different from an authored page where you can say like single, multi-select and everything. It kind of controls the way the filters look. Here you have a lot more control about what type of filter and what it will look like. You can have a button set, a calendar checkbox, a double list box. A typical drop down is what tends to default. Input, a radio button for selection. If you have limited values, that's where this and a button set is nice too. Toggle if you only have 2 values to go from one to the other. You can put text. And with a page, if you add a submit button, then you can change the filters, and until you click submit, the page will not be refreshed and the content associated with those filters will not be refreshed. But without a submit button on a page, then the moment you change a filter, it automatically refreshes the content appropriate and applicable to that filter on the page. And then we also have run, deferred, and schedule buttons. The user can then select that and click that and then go through that as well. We won't get to that today, but I just want to, this is again an introduction, and I'm trying to just showcase the capabilities of what is there and get started at a basic level. So you have a good foundation. I believe that a strong foundation and understanding what's available to you makes the process so much easier. When you start developing, you'll be amazed at how quickly you can develop pages once you know what's available to you, right, through the tool.
Renee?
All right, so that, yeah.
So there's a question. They like that the page allows to apply custom CSS and JavaScript. Are there any plans to have this flexibility in the report designer?
Not that I'm aware of. There is a lot of capabilities. What I will say is with Designer, creating a visualization is the question about adding JavaScript. Really, you have to think about how would you add the JavaScript to the individual, right, report or chart. And really how that's done is through drill downs. I kind of talked about that in the last Focus Fridays, right? About that's how you really can bring drill downs JavaScript into your reports and charts. And we have some functions available that can make that process a little bit easier. It depends on what you want to accomplish. But really, that's the scope of that is through drill downs within your report visualization. That's how you would add your custom JavaScript.
So Reed, if there's something that you're looking for specifically, you can always open a case and they can look at it as a new feature if it's not available. All right, thanks, Renee.
Makes perfect. All right, thank you. Okay, so just to continue, okay, so there we have controls, and now we're in the settings and format. And I kind of showed a little bit of it, but right now I want to just showcase right here we're at the page, right? So let me just go back to outline. You can see we're at the page level, and you can see that there's a lot of features available to us, and I'm going to come through these, but notice that you have a settings tab and a format tab. Format is more the styling and control. Settings is a lot of other attributes depending on where you're focused at on a page. And again, this here is what we call the visualization toolbar right here. This is the designer toolbar on top. This is the visualization toolbar. We have the option here, we can add a container and just click it here. I tend to just drag content in or put a container in and then drag the content on top of that. That's certainly either available, or you can click this button as well. There is an interactions button, which really helps you to create interactions in your page. We're not going to get to that today, but definitely we'll try to discuss some of that for the next time because it's a very important and useful feature. One button I love, and I think you really need to pay attention to this part if nothing else, is this info button on a page. This tells you that content that you added on the page, where is that content coming from? And as well as what filters are associated with it. Very important option. We'll show that once I get content on the page. And then we have our run button. And now that you and this is the page canvas, which will have a filter toolbar within it once content and filters have been added to the page. And then I just want to come back up here to the item I skipped, hide and show panes. So now that you know the page layout, if I click this, if I uncheck resources, it gives me a little bit more real estate. It takes away the sidebar and its associated resource panel and gives you a little bit more real estate. If that's important to you, I'm going to put it back. And then settings and format, same thing. So you can see my properties panel with settings and format has now been hidden, but my sidebar and resources pane is back. And I'm going to keep them back. Generally, I probably recommend that you have it all available to you depending on what you're doing and developing within the page, but you do have that if you feel like you need that extra real estate at some point during your development. Okay, so we have a page. You understand the layout now, and an important factor, right, is that blue border to know where you're focused on, and we have our outline that can change, and we can say where do we want to be positioned on. All of that is really important. So let's add some content. And actually, before I do that, all right, let's add content, and then I'll talk about paging a little bit here. So I want to add content to this page. Very first thing I'm going to do, going and remember it's existing content. This is an assembled page, and I probably repeated that already 100 times, but it's an important concept. And I have these few little car reports. They're very plain. There's nothing special about it. But really it's all about the parameters to showcase pages for you. So I'm going to I could drag this in if I want. Can just double click it. So I could drag this content in, but I'm going to double click it. It'll position. And now you'll notice right away the filter icon has a little purple information icon badge. And if you hover over it, it says filters are available to add or configure. It's letting you know, hey, that content that you added has actual filters. There are info variables in there that you can add to the page, and it would make sense to do so, right? And then I also want to showcase the outline. I'll go to filters in a minute, but notice how the outline changed. Now here is my page. Here's my section where that content is living in. Here is the container, and notice that it has container dash for the ID. And then if I click lower into that, you'll actually see that's the content where the content is displayed. Very important just to be aware of where you're located, where is the rhubarb, and how you can change things based on it. Notice when I'm in the content, the settings, and then in the format, I can inherit the page theme, or I can change and pick something else, or a custom one if I want. Here at the content level, right, at the container level, I'm now in the format. I can style it and change it if I want to, but I'm going to go back to the default. If I click settings, now I can see at the container level, I have classes that I can add. And I'm going to come back to this with the options because I want to start at the page level. But I just want to go to filters because this is really important to be aware of. I'm not adding the filters to the page yet. I have the option right away. It's telling me add all filters to the page. That's easy. It's an easy way to do it. If I have a lot of filters, just add it. It adds it to the toolbar. And then I can change and convert, or I could do them individually if I want. So I can certainly right-click, add to a page as its default type for that filter, meaning drop-down, or if it's a date. Or I can add it to the page as if that particular filter type can be a different type. So I could say drop-down, checkbox, et cetera, so forth. You'll get the options that are available that are applicable based on the filter itself. And the same thing for car. So I could do them individually if I want, or I could just add all the filters to the page. Those are the options, right? And you have an option here, a little menu to expand all, collapse all, to show the binding details. So I can go in here and see where they're bounded to if I want to. I can also say, hey, I don't want to see that. Notice it's grayed out, by the way. Let me show it again. You notice that the filter itself is grayed out because it hasn't been added to the page. Once it's added to the page, you'll see that that's actually colored and it's no longer grayed out. Another thing is show unused filters. If I have, maybe I'm adding new content after I've already had existing content and filters added to the page and I decide to add some additional content on this page, I can uncheck unshow the show unused filters, and it'll tell me I have 2 unused. And I haven't added anything to the page yet in terms of filters, so both of them, and that's the only ones, but I'm going to go back and show them. And also an important thing to note is country and car are at the same level. And if I close or collapse country and car, right, nothing else is within them. So they're not a hierarchy, meaning these filters are independent of each other, right? They're not chained together. It's an important concept. We're going to take a look at it closer in a bit, but I want to mention that. But here I want to go to my info button that I talked about, right, that I love. I'm going to click that, and you're going to see now, instead of seeing the content, what you see is what it is, the reference path, and you can actually copy that if you wanted to go there and check the data source. And here, very important, what are the parameters? And you can obviously tell I created these reports in Designer because you can see the new kind of AMPA variable names, DF_WH_, and you can see country, and then the same thing with DF_WH_car. So this filter, this particular content report that I created in Designer had 2 filters. It had country and car. And just for reference, so if you want to go back, and I know you guys are coders, I can just certainly showcase this and open them each in Designer if I wanted to. But I wanted to just show you what the reports look like. I told you they're very plain, and I did that deliberately. just to create a very small test for this demo. But you can see here, I have a basic table file. I'm on car. I'm summing retail cost, dealer cost, sales, and I'm sorting by country, car, body type, and model. Kind of reversed it, but hey, instead of model, body type, hey, that's what I did here. But you can see that I had two AMPA variables, country and car, which is really AMPA variable DF_WH. And you can see here, that's the name you're going to see on the filter when it gets displayed, and you can change that on the page as well. So that's the first report, right? I'm going to close that one out. I'm just going to show you the second report, edit with the text editor. And now you'll see here, it's kind of the same thing, except I added an output format, WFMT, with a static list of HTML, etc. All right, so just so you can see that for reference, especially if you come back to this recording. And then for the third, and let me showcase that. And you'll see here, I did like rolling sums, one just across the whole report and then one within country. That's easily available through design and visualization. You don't have to create this function. It's done for you automatically. And then you can see I have by country by car. And you can see this content only has country, right? It does have the same AMPA variable name, right, for country, DF_WH_country. Say that a few times fast. Okay, so, but I wanted to say that specifically because we're going to add this to the page. It's a very important concept to understand that when you have filters on a page, not all the filters apply to all the content on that page potentially, right? And so what you might see in one, which is exactly what you might want, but it's an important thing to be aware of. And so that's why I like to showcase it, because it can get a little confusing if you're not expecting it. But if I make a point of it, hopefully you say, oh, okay, now, and that's what you want, then that's exactly what you want to happen, then perfect. So that's our info button. I'm going to come back so you can see the content. And now I just want to showcase some other features, right, before we move forward and add other content. One thing, again, I talked about the outline. You can see what's there. Notice I put my focus on the page, and I want to talk about some page options. We do have format. And certainly on the format tab, I can change the theme, and you'll see how it looks. And again, this is in preview, but you get the idea. When I have more content, I'll show margin and maximum width. In fact, I can do the maximum width right now, but it's easier to see it when there's more content on the page. I'm going to come back to the Designer 2018. The page heading. I can double click and change the page heading, and I'm just going to say, you know, car demo page. And then I can change the heading right here, size. I can make it larger, I can make it smaller, but I'm going to leave it to that right now. And let me come back to settings, because this is what I really like to showcase. Maybe I just put that page heading there, but maybe for this page I don't want it. I can uncheck the option. Notice my focus is on the page, so that's why I'm seeing the page settings here, and I'm on the settings tab. I can say, and you can see the page heading disappeared. Another great option, and this is specifically starting in 9.2 and higher, you can enable initial auto load. So by default, the content, when it first runs the page, it's going to load the content that's on that page. But if you don't want it, you can uncheck this, and then when you run it, it's going to wait for you to actually click refresh, or refresh here on the containers or the containers. But then just to be aware that that's a feature and available, and that started in that was available starting with release 9.2. Another thing is showing the page toolbar, right, over here. If I uncheck it, you'll notice the icons here disappeared. I can make it available, and then I can say, no, maybe I want that, but I don't want to see the page refresh. So I can uncheck that. You can see it disappeared. I can bring it back. Enable runtime bookmarks. Now, I can say yes, have bookmarks or not. If you do this and you haven't saved the page yet and you run it, you're still not going to see that bookmark feature. You have to actually have saved the page whether or not to see bookmarks or not. But that feature certainly does work. And then show export. And what I like about this is if you click it here, even in preview, you can see the options that are available. Maybe I don't want all those options available to the user. So I'll uncheck and say, okay, I don't want them to see anything, but maybe I just don't want them to have portrait, PDF portrait. And now you notice I still have drop down and only has those two options. If I decide I only want one, maybe I just want image, Notice now you don't have the drop down, but when I hover, the click will bring you right to the export. So it's smart enough not to have to give you a drill down if it's just one you selected to do the export. I think that's nice. And then include page filters. Now, this is unchecked right now because I haven't added the filters to the page yet. But if I don't want them, I certainly could uncheck it. And so that's the reason why it's unchecked now. And then you can decide whether or not you want it below the header, above the header, left position, modal, where it'll come up as a pop-up. You can hide it, whether you're not to see it and it floats. That's certainly a capability. But then again, if you don't want to use the filters by default and you want to create your own location, you can use that grid container, right, to control that. Hopefully I'll get a chance to showcase that today. That's the page options. And then you have a little option here you can go and it kind of gives you another page default for that in filters and label position. You can also get that same thing depending on where you're focused at. Another thing I like to showcase is when you're in the section, you can make a section collapsible or not. Right now you only have one section for a page. If I click within this this section, and I have to be focused on the section, I can insert a section below or above. And then you'll get a section 2 on your page and positioned appropriately where you can put other containers. And that can be very useful in terms of potentially maybe hiding a section. If it's collapsible, you'll see that you'll get a little, here, if I just click this, you'll see you get that little arrow and I can make it collapsible or not. But otherwise the section is not collapsible. But I can have multiple sections and they can be collapsible or not collapsible. That's what that feature is for. But it can be very useful to control some, the display on a page and to avoid when you're hiding content potentially having blank space, right? That can sometimes occur. And that's more complicated and more advanced, but just to be aware of it. Okay, so I kind of covered that. So now let me add additional content. I think this is a good point to add some additional content to the page.
So Renee, about
so
5 more minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
5 more. Can you give me 10? Is it possible?
Sure.
Okay.
So for
and,
so let me just say, for you guys that are here for the mainframe configuring DB2, we'll start right after, and I don't think it's going to be more than 15-20 minutes, so we should be good.
Thank you. Okay, so let's just start adding additional content because that's really important to understand pages, right? We've just kind of got an overview at this point. So I'm going to just say Car Report 2. And notice, remember Car Report 2 had additional palms. I'm going to click the info button and you can see this has WFMT, right? And now what's important is when you go to the filters, you'll see now it has another one. And this is just doing the display output, right? That prompt with the prompting for that filter, you said select an output format. We can change that once we bring it into the page. But I wanted to showcase how this content has an additional parameter, additional filter, and therefore if we add it to the page, it will add, it's already part of that. And now let's just go back and add another piece of content. And I'll change the filter wrap. And here is, this one only had the country. I'm going to add that, and you'll notice our filters don't have anything extra because country was already there as a filter. And with our info, we can see that this has country, this has country and car, and this one has the country, car, and the output WFFMT, right? So things to be aware of is if I change WFFMT on this page, the only content that's going to be impacted is this container right here for Car Report 2. If I change country, country is a filter on all of these panels, all of the panels will be impacted. If I change car, the first and the second, the Car Report 1 and Car Report 2 content will be impacted because car is a filter on those panels. Again, important piece to be aware of. So what is the easiest thing I can do? Since we're limited on time, I want to say, now I certainly, again, could add to the page, add these individually, but the really easy thing is just add everything, add all content to the page. And this is important. You'll see when you add the filters to the page, they'll all have blue bars around that go to the outline, but you really want, that's because it added it all at one time. And notice that I'm going to focus on one filter, and then here I can, on the outline, I can go here and focus on it. If you focus on the outer part, you're focusing on the cell you can see on the outline, but if I go in here in the inner part, I'm focused on the filter. And this is where the settings and format, you can do alignments and everything where you want your label positioned on the format side. That's more the styling, right? But here it tells you the type. One thing I wanted to say is if I wanted to change the names, what it looks like here, I could say country, maybe in lowercase, just double click right in there, car, and here I want to say maybe output format, right? Just to showcase, right? And notice when I'm over here, contextually tells you what type of filter it is. Country is a multiple select, car is a multiple select, output format is a single select. You can see the type. Notice the IDs have filter panels so you know where you're focused on, because when it's on the cell, it'll say filter cell. I like to point that out. So classes, if I need to assign a class name, I could have a tooltip for a hover. Global name, really important when you have multiple pages in a portal and you want filters to be impacted. When you change one on one page to impact a filter on another page, you do it via global name. And that's how you'll associate those filters. Otherwise, country, even if I had the same filter name on one page, is not going to impact that country field parameter, whatever it might be called, if it's the same on another page, only through global. Optional and important feature, if I uncheck it, says make a selection. It forces you, when you run it, that you have to make a selection before that page is going to load, and it puts a red border around it, and then certainly I could select England, and then you can see the content will be displayed. I'm going to put back option. Placeholder text, you can change when you have it, when it's mandatory to what gets displayed. So I could certainly say, you know, all country values, like something like that. And it helps if I can type. So you can see that once I click, and and it'll save it, by the way. So that'll come up. And then if I want it, I don't want that, I can clear it out, and it will go back to the default, make a selection, but I'm going to make it optional. And you have the search capabilities that you can add on, and paging. And I think we'll talk about that next time. All is important. I could say it whether or not I want all to show or not. And if I do want all, do I want to display all for a single value? This has to do with prior capabilities that we had in the way our drop-downs displayed. Some customers didn't want all, and if you had a single value, all with that single value option. If I just want to see the single value and not all, I can uncheck that. I can change the display text for all as well. That's possible. Default value. This is where I'm getting into that was very important. So let me change and come back to where you can see the report output. Default value. Remember I showed you the authored page and I selected England, and in the preview it was England, and in the runtime it was England. But here, I'm going to change it here. I'm not going to change it here. And now because we have an author page, it'll impact the preview, but when I run it, what I will see is that it's all. And that's because that's not the default when you have an assembled page from existing content. The default value gets determined by this option on each of these filters. Very important concept to be aware of. So what I can do here, and what's great in 9.3 that they added, if you're in 9.2, you actually just have to type in either a value right here. I could, you could type it in, or a global variable, amper, some variable name if you have it available. And it was a single value, right? But here we actually in 9.3 changed it where we have a little edit option and gives you this little dialogue. And I can say select England and France and pick it, or I can enter manually, or I can say, hey, I want it to be a global variable. I'm going to click OK. Notice the default value here is England, France. This changes the drop down here, but the important point is this is the default value. When I run it, notice now that that is the default value. One key point that I wanted to get to is notice that car, right, is not bound country, right? So I'm seeing all the car values. So I have the potential here if I pick something and notice that these don't have output. This one does, right? Because remember, this third report, country is the only filter that impacts that report. And therefore, England and France, okay, it has everything. It's not being limited by the car selection. and therefore that's the difference. And of course, if I change this and I say, PDF, you can see what I have. It impacts only that particular content. So I just want to make that point. I think that's an important concept. So here's the default value. Now I certainly could say, hey, I don't want these. I can come back and I can say, okay, and then it'll do _folk_no for default. So that's important. And the last piece I want to get in the last few minutes that I think is important, and we'll certainly pick up from where we left off for the next time to the next session, but is binding. I want to come back to filters because this is really important. So remember, if I select England, I'm still seeing, right, all the cars. But what if I want to bind it? Now the car file doesn't have a hierarchy within it, so that's why they weren't bound together. If there's a hierarchy in the master, and I'll showcase that next time with WF Retail, then it will pick that up as part of the filters if those filters you're selecting are part of a hierarchy. And you can change it and not have them part of a hierarchy as well. But here, what if I wanted car to be part of country, right? And I want a true hierarchy. I only want to see the cars that are associated with that specific country. I can actually drag and drop car right on top of country. And now what you're going to see is I have England selected. Now look at the impact. Only those cars. It's as easy as that to bind variables. It really, truly is that easy. And if these were bound together, now you're going to see an option where if I say I can unchain that from the parent, and if I do that, it goes to the bottom. The order here makes no difference to what's here. But notice now they're at the same level, and these are no longer bound together, and I'm going to get all the cars available to me. Really important concept to understand bindings, but it is really that simple. So if you have the important concept to understand is if there's a hierarchy in your data, it will certainly respect that, and it will respect the hierarchy if those filters are within. And even if like you have a hierarchy of field 1, field 2, field 3 of those filters, and you only have 1 and 3, you don't have the middle hierarchy, it still knows that 1 and 3 are still part of a hierarchy. It's going to respect that. You can certainly change it, and just like I did, I just removed it. So again, I can bring car back, say this is how it came in, and now when I collapse country, you no longer see car because that is a hierarchy. So I know I talked about a lot of information today, and we're at the end of it. We'll pick up where we left off from this, maybe with a little review, and then move on to some additional concepts. But hopefully this gave you a really nice introduction into Page Designer, to assembling pages with existing content that you can go and start doing right now with our tutorial files or your own data, just to see, just working through just something as simple as creating and picking up existing content and how you can get filters applied and everything. So hopefully this was useful, and we'll take a look and see if there's any questions related to it at this point.
So Renee, there's a in-depth type of question in the chat, if you could take a look at that. I'll start my stuff ready while you do that.
Okay. Text editor wants custom styling through Designer. Oh,
no, yeah, go up a little more.
Go up. Okay. Okay. That's about CSS reporting in Designer, and if there's a delay.
No, keep going.
And there's another one even beyond that. Oh, wow. Okay.
The one from Eric.
Control page, hours and minutes. Can we put one drive and one control? I know there's a lot of things that they're looking at in terms of new features. Some of the things that we're looking at is to actually control like things on initial load, right? Have interactions on initial load. That would help some of the kind of control that you want. For the IDs, I would recommend not using IDs with your JavaScript. So the container ID is certainly available and you can certainly utilize it. But I would say give it a class name and reference what you want to that object via the class name. So I know I probably didn't answer the questions. If there's something specific you're looking for, if you can add it to the survey, I can certainly follow up with you on that. And then I'm going to send it back to Walter at this point.
So Mark, you have your hand raised. Do you have a question? Can you put it in the chat or put in the chat if you want us to unmute you? Yeah, I'm not seeing anything. All right. I think I'm sharing. All right, so for those of you that are on, oh,
Yeah.
Go ahead,
Sorry,
Renee.
you are sharing.
All right, thank
I
you.
was saying you are. Sorry.
For those of you, oh, no problem, Mark. For those of you that aren't on the mainframe, thanks for coming. You don't have to stay. You can if you want to. The next section is going to be strictly relating to an IBM mainframe customers. If you do drop, please make sure you fill out the evaluation. We do look at your feedback and take it all very seriously. And if you do drop, just thank you all for coming and see you next month. If you happen to be in the Chicago area, I will be in Chicago the beginning of August. I want to say it's the August 6th. That's where that Tuesday is for the Summit Roadshow. So if you can make it, I can see you in person. All right. So I'm going to talk about on the mainframe, on IBM mainframe, how to configure our DB2 adapter. So I'm going to talk about the call level interface connection, the CLI, the call attach facility, CAF. I'm going to show you, so in our DB2 installation manual, we have these options of when you install, you have to decide, are you going to use Ediserve or you're not going to use Ediserve? So I'm going to show you how to set it up for both and then how to test the configuration. So for CLI, CLI is the easiest to configure. You just create a new member in your errors DD concatenation called Ediserve. Inside of there, you say db2 underscore CLI equals yes. db2 underscore rel equals whatever your release level is. Here I'm doing db2 release 12. And then db2 access equals y. Then we're going to create also in errors a folk prof. In the folk prof, I'm going to have to create a setting because I have to do a connection to db2 using the CLI. So this constr is just a construct of the location. So this is your db2 location, your user ID, and your password. And then we actually execute it by doing engine db2 set connection attributes. We're calling this connection 1, and we pass it the information that we set in the previous line. In the newer releases, you could actually put this all on one line because I think our LRECL is 2044. But in the older versions, you only had 80 characters, so we had to separate it out into 2 separate lines. But either way will work. You can add additional DB2 settings if you want. In this case, I'm setting my DB workspace because I have my own personal one. And then I'm saying I want my errors to be the DBMS errors and not the focus errors. All right, that was it. That was it for CLI configuring DB2. Two entries in errors. One that says you're going to access DB2 and what version of DB2 you're accessing, and the other one for your connection string. So for CAF, I'm going to show you first CAF with the Ediserve, because this is probably one that a lot of people aren't doing. So in your conf.data library, in your data set, you're going to have a DB2 v11pr, DB2 v12pr, and this IDB2 bind. So the IDB2 bind is JCL that you're going to need to run, which will bind the DBRM lib to your DB2 environment. So we ship that to you, and that's what those DB2 v11 and v12 PRs are. So depending on your DB2 version, we'll decide which one you're going to use. Okay, when you run IDB2 bind, you have to have DBA privileges. So a lot of times you might need to send this to your DBA to have them run it. When you run it, you need to know your SSID, your plan name, the DBRM lib, and that was if you're using the V11 or V12 that we ship. Your DB2 load library. So I'm doing ours for DB212 is DSN C10 because C in hex is equivalent to 12. You need your DB2 CList load library name. At the top of the JCL in that IDB2 bind member, there are comments telling you what to do. Just got them all up. It says this JCL is used to submit the batch job, replace DB2VZ PRM with either 10 or 11. Well, that needs to get changed to 11 or 12. And then replace your DB2 load library, plan name, subsystem, DSN list with the real values. Submit the job and look for condition code 0. After you've bound the plan, you then need to, whoever did that would then need to grant execute on plan that they just created to either your group of your focus users or an individual user or to public. But in addition, now we have to create an edit-serve member, just like we did for CLI, but instead of db2 underscore CLI equals yes, we're saying db2 underscore CAF. Same release, same access. We also have a folk prof because now I have to set the SSID and the plan to your values. If you don't set them, you're going to use the ones that were used when we created the DBRM lib for you. So this is important. Okay, then we have our other settings just like we had before. So that's it. So that's the CAF with edit-serve. If you do it without edit-serve, you still need to run the IDB2 bind. So that hasn't changed. Still have to grant execute to the plan or on the plan to your population that's going to access this. Then instead of an edit-serve, you need to copy RR-set number. So if you're doing, let's say you're doing DB212, like we've been talking about, you will copy RR-set 12 back into the same library, but you're just going to call it RR-set with no number. You still need folkprof to set your SSID and plan, but then that's the only difference. Instead of creating the edit-serve, you then have to copy RR-set version number just to a generic no numbered RR-set. Okay. To test, if you're running JCL, I'm doing program focus. My step lib points to my focus foklib.load, and it also makes sure I point to the proper DB2 libraries. So you need to, you might not need to have the step lib in your environment because it might be in a linked list that might already be loaded, and that way you don't have to do it yourself. We have errors. So I put my edit-serve that I created and my folkprof in a data set called myid.vugdb2.cfg, and I concatenate it before the one that we ship out. You could have put it in errors.data, you could have put it in conf.prf, you could have put it in conf.cfg. So there's choices of where you put it, but just make sure that you remember where you put it in case you need to change it in the future. Okay, just other DDs that we need to run the JCL. So in our sysin, this is where we now put our focus commands that are going to run when focus starts in batch. Engine DB2 question mark will show us the settings of our adapter environment. SQL DB2 says we're going to execute some SQL pass-through. So we're going to execute a select statement. In this case, we're going to do select star from sysibm.sysdummy1, which is an IBM table, which pretty much everybody has read access to. And to terminate the SQL DB2 section, And then we're going to do another one, which is going to do get variable, so we can see what version of DB2 we're connecting to. Okay, you don't really need to do both of these, but I'm just giving you some alternates because the get variable is a kind of powerful function that you can use. Then we fin focus, we close the sysyn with a /*. And here's the output of the engine DB2 question mark. So the things you want to look for is that your SSID, when you're doing CAF, is pointing to the one that you set in your FOC_prof. And the same for the user set plan. If you set DBMS errors, error type to DBMS, you'll see that down here at the bottom. There's DB2, DBMS. You have my default DB space is the one that I also set in the FOC_prof. When you run, wow, that's kind of small. Oh, just never mind. So when I run this, the output of the select star from sysIBM system-E1 is just one field with one record, and the result should show you why. The other output is where we did the get variable, and that has the DSN 12015, which means we're accessing DB2 version 12. Okay. If you're doing this via CList, again, I have to have access to both my focus load library and my DB2 load library. So we have this internal setup VYC step, which will basically take TaskLib and allocate it so that it'll run and be able to see both of them. So this is our kind of replacement to StepLib. If you had your own CList that you ran when you signed into TSO, you wouldn't have that. The StepLib would be done for you automatically. And again, if you're in linked list, you wouldn't have to specify your DB2 libraries either because they'd already be available to you. We have our errors. Again, we're concatenating my config to errors.data. And then I call focus. And this just cleans up when I come out. And then once you're in the focus interactive prompt, you can run the two SQL DB2 sections that you saw in the JCL. So recommendations, always use IDB2 bind member from the conf.data in the version that you're installing configuring. Don't just go ahead and say, well, I already have one that I ran last time, so I can reuse it. Most of the time it will probably work, but it's not recommended because something might have changed. If using CAF install, I recommend you always use the editserv method. If you copy RRset, you will need to remember to recopy it if you do a new install or if you're installing a new version. Each new install will require a new run of IDB2 bind as the RRset modules are tied together. So RRset and DBV, so RRset 12 and DBV12 PR are linked. And if they don't match, you're going to get an error when you try to use them. The DBRM lib entries have versioning turned on. Thank you, Laurie. So that way you can use the same plan name for all of your installed versions of Focus. The version will point to the correct plan. So if I'm running RRset from version 7709 and I want to use the same plan name for 9.3, you can do that. And then when the RRset runs, it's going to look and find the correct version of the plan that you want based on what it finds in the RRset module. So it makes life a little easier for you because you don't have to have multiple plan names. And lastly, I'm going to talk about accessing DB2 v13 because we're getting a lot of cases. Oh, look, Brad just said, will there be v13 files? So historically, we only provide files in versions where the DB2 version that you're trying to look at was already available. So all of our versions went out. We haven't certified them yet, so we don't have v13 files yet. But yes, the plan is eventually we will have them, but they will only be in the newer versions when that happens and up. So the versions you have right now don't have that. So I'm going to give you two options that you can do in the meantime. Because the back end of DB2 v13 is similar to DB2 v12, so there's not really much that changed between DB2 v12 and DB2 v13. It allows us to do these two options. So option one, I call the fake out. So you configure IBI focus as if you're accessing DB2 v12. If you're using CAF, run IDB2 bind using your DB2 v13 libraries. So those are the DB2 libraries, the SDSN load and the SDNS CLST. But you're going to use the DB2 v12 PR in that part where it asks you. So when it mentions the DBRM lib, you're going to use our v12. When you configure editserv, you're going to tell editserv, oh, well, even though I'm running 13, I want you to think I'm running 12. That way it's going to go out and find the RRSet12 member. If you just copied RRSet12 into RRSet, then you don't really have to worry about it because it's just going to pick up the RRSet. It's not going to look for RRSet with a number. So remember in the editserv, we had the db2_vel equals 12. That's how it determines which RRSet version it's going to pick up. Okay, so that's option one. Option two, duplicate the v12 files as v13 files. So copy RRSet12 to RRSet13 in home load. Copy OD3DB12 to OD3DB13. The RRSet is used for the CAF connection, and the OD3DB12 is for the CLI connection. So and then we're going to copy the DBV12 PR to DBV13 PR in conf.data. So now you have everything you need as far as 13 versions, where you can just use db2_vel13 and follow everything in the previous installation information. So we don't have it, but it's doable. And if you're running really old versions of Focus, meaning anything prior to 7703, you should already have the DB2 parm file to run the GenFDB2 process, and just point to your DB2 v13 libraries. So that same DB2 parms that you've been using for DB2 version 10, 11, and 12 are still usable by 13. So that's all I had. Any questions? All right, Laurie, see you in Chicago. Again, I want to thank everyone for coming. Hopefully see you next month. Maybe I'll see you in Chicago. Please remember to fill out your evaluations, and again, thanks.
Thank you, everyone.